Going to record. Got it. Okay. Well, good afternoon, PSC retirees. Happy New Year. It's a little bit late, but welcome to this special meeting, which is our first chapter meeting of 2023. Our meeting is staffed by Samantha Cherry, as she has been doing for the last almost 3 years. And I want to thank Samantha on behalf of the chapter for her outstanding work during the pandemic, getting us through the Zoom meetings. And Samantha actually has a lot of other work to do. I think you staff the database. So we have, thanks to our leaders and Dean Hubbard, our executive director, we have now a part-time organizer or liaison to the staff assigned to our chapter, and that is Ava Farkas. Is Ava here?
No, but
she's in the waiting room. Here she is.
Okay, Ava is, we'll give a more complete introduction to Ava next meeting in February when we have a little more time. But Ava's going to be taking over the Zooms and other responsibilities. So also, I want to thank always Diane Mena, the vice chair, and Bonnie Nelson, the secretary, the entire executive committee of nearly 30 people, and of course you, our members, who have been stepping up and making the phone calls and writing the letters and getting outside and going to City Hall and doing all the things that we need to do to maintain our traditional Medicare and senior care as we know it. And today's meeting is going to be devoted to that topic. Before I start and introduce the speakers, I'm going to call on Eileen Moran. Is Eileen here? Eileen is going to just speak to you for a couple of minutes about Vote Cope. And Vote Cope is the political and legislative funding arm of the PSC. It enables us to lobby at City Council and support candidates, which has been so important at City Council and the state legislature. But the funding for this work does not come out of member dues. The funding for this comes out of Vote Cope. And when we were working, we often had that money taken out of our paycheck. But since we don't get a paycheck, real paycheck, we have to donate. So Eileen has been on our ledge committee for years. Where's Eileen?
I'm here. Okay. I'm here. I want to thank everyone, first of all, because the retiree chapter has an exceptional record with Vote Cope in the sense that we are probably the chapter that donates the most to Vote Cope. And I think it's particularly, I wanted to call our attention to it because obviously I think some of what we're going to hear as good news today, or we have already heard as good news, the fact that the City Council refused to vote on the change in the administrative code is built on some of the work that was possible because of Vote Cope. In 2021, almost the whole City Council, due to term limits, was up for re-election. So that meant that the PSC Legislation Committee began to screen candidates and interview candidates and then recommend candidates to the PSC for endorsement. We then elected collectively, us New York City folks, the most progressive City Council group that we have ever had. And I suspect that that has much to do with the fact that the mayor's agenda to force folks out of their traditional Medicare did not occur. The Legislation Committee did that screening and endorsements in 2021. And then for the next 2 years, for the next year, yes, 2 years, began to build those relationships. So I want to say is that our goals for ourselves as retirees, as well as our goals for CUNY, happen because when it's not election season, we are still working with public officials to protect CUNY for our students, as well as to protect our benefits. So I know that you should soon get a request for donating to Vote Cope in your mailbox. That normally happens in the fall, but there was a problem at the NICET level with this, getting the list together. So it was delayed. So it's kind of fitting that it now comes in it will come in your box, just as we see that we will be continuing this fight. And again, one of the strengths that the legislation committee had, not only that it had built those relationships, and again, I would want to call out Heather James in particular of BMCC, and Bettina and Luke and Tiffany, the staff of the PSC on the legislation committee, because they built those relationships and they set up those appointments for themselves to interview those candidates and for us to go after them when we wanted a particular vote. And they have all been told that the two priorities for their reelection in 2023 is healthcare and no cuts to CUNY. So again, you see your Vote Cope dollars will be working hard for CUNY and for the protection of member benefits. So I will put a link in the chat if you want to donate online now. And otherwise, again, you can wait till you get the notice in the mail, but it would be fine if you want to donate now. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And I forgot to thank the staff who have been working so hard with us under Bettina's direction. Tiffany Brown, Heather, Sam have done a fabulous job. So we have a star lineup for our program today. And first, we're going to hear from our president, James Davis, who will bring us up to date on how the union is currently positioned in this struggle for Medicare and Advantage and senior care. And I want to really can't thank enough James, his executive leaders, the executive council, the PSC has put, and Dean, of course, the PSC has put this struggle front and center. They have taken it on as a union-wide fight, as they should, and we very much appreciate it because that we know that this is not the only thing that the union has to work on. So I'm going to introduce James, and I'd like to see him too on
I'm here.
screen. Okay, James, hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really, really good to be able to spend a little time with you all. Thank you, Mighty Retiree Chapter. It's good to see everyone. Thank you, Anne, for inviting me back. And thanks, Diane and Bonnie, for your work, and the Retiree EC Chapter for everything you're working on. This is a really vibrant chapter, and it's a big responsibility to serve on the executive committee. So thanks for that. And the chapter does tremendous work. Eileen, who you just heard from, thank you for your pitch for Vote Cope. I know probably a lot of folks in this room are familiar with Vote Cope and have been regular contributors, but I really do need to emphasize the connection that Eileen just made between those contributions and what we're able to do either at the State House or at City Hall. I want to also thank all of the members of the Social Safety Net Working Group. I know a lot of folks in this in this group are have been active and remain active in the social safety net working group. And also just point out, you know, what Anne mentioned, that in relation to this particular struggle around retiree health benefits, which is really a much broader struggle around health benefits more broadly, you know, a number of people have been really instrumental in building our capacity to, I guess I would say, punch above our weight as a labor union. And I would, you know, emphasize the work that Dean has done, that our legislation committee and legislative staff have done incredible. I mean, and Barbara Caress, Barbara Bowen, and Debbie Bell have done amazing work and continue to inspire and just put real fiber into everything that we're doing here. So thanks to all of them. You know, Barbara Caress said to me the other day that our little engine that could, legislative staff here, Bettina, Sam, Tiffany, Luke, is like the best legislative staff that she's seen ever in any labor union. And I think that's saying something from somebody with, you know, many decades of experience in New York City labor. So, you know, I don't want to just pat ourselves on the back, because we are not out of the woods on this one, but the work that we have been able to do, as Anne has said, to not position ourselves, but position our ideas and our political force and our proposal in the center of this. Frankly, I didn't expect it. If you'd asked me 2 years ago coming into this is not where I thought we'd be. There are still risks, and I think we should talk about them, and we should speak very soberly about the risks that are in front of us and all of organized labor around healthcare in the city. But we're positioned differently today than I anticipated. So let me run through where we are positioned, and I really want to get to questions and discussion. So I'm gonna try not to carry on at length, and I know Dean and Debbie and Bettina are all here also to amplify or qualify anything that I may say. But before getting into kind of brass tacks, I just want to observe that as we have gone through this entire process, from, you know, when we lost a vote early on that the MLC, you know, path that they would want to pursue to try to solve for $600 million, that was going to be around Medicare Advantage. Throughout the whole process, we've really been guided by a few core principles, and we've tried to keep those in focus in whatever tactical or strategic paths we try to pursue. The first one is that the problem of funding healthcare in New York City fundamentally is it's not a technical problem. It's not a legal problem. Certainly, there are a lot of technical and legal issues that come up along the way in trying to resolve this. It's not even, I would argue, fundamentally a financial problem. It's a political problem. It is really a political problem that has, along with it, you know, some big cost issues. But fundamentally, it's a political issue. And I think if we can maintain that focus, we can be guided to the best solutions and strategy. So that's thing one. Thing two is we've, again, tried to keep our eyes on the fact that it is possible, and it flows out of the first thing, it is possible to preserve premium-free healthcare for retirees and their dependents. It's possible to do that, and it's possible to do it without imposing premiums for health insurance for active employees. And that's important because the shape that a lot of this has taken, especially in recent months, is to try to pit active employees against retirees and vice versa. And then the third thing I would highlight is that it's been very important for us to see throughout this crisis, I don't think it's an overstatement to call it a crisis, but to try to maintain a vision throughout the crisis that, you know, it's not enough, or it's not really our task merely to try to choose among the best of a series of bad possible outcomes, but to try to see within the crisis, when we can, opportunities to revisit and try to center to propose as an organization, to propose more sustainable alternatives. Because we often are in a situation where we say, well, how do we contain the damage? How do we choose the least bad option? And we've really tried to say, and it's been difficult to say, in crises like this, what visionary organizations do, right, is to try to put forward alternatives that are more sustainable, that can come out of the crisis. And so I credit my colleagues, for trying to develop those proposals and also pushing me to fight for them. So we do have a proposal, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I think a lot of you are familiar with it. It's been on our website, it's been in our lobbying materials for what I would call a third way, right? It's a third way in the sense that we're saying it's not, we have told the city council, don't vote for an administrative code change, don't capitulate to the pressure for Medicare Advantage. But, we've also cognizant of the fact that there are threats in going the other direction, and simply saying no, 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 we need to be the party of no. And, certainly there's litigation out there, and, we respect the groups that are litigating this, but we've tried to put forward a proposal that we think elected officials can galvanize around, and not simply say no to the administrative code change, but to say no, and we are prepared to put some of our political capital on the line for, for a way forward. It could take a few years, and so we need some short-term solutions. But given the fact that there are big picture issues in funding mechanisms for healthcare savings for the city, it could take a minute, and we want to build the political will on the council to support that. And so to cut to the chase, as Eileen said, there was a really critical sequence of kind of moments, pivotal moments, where the decision from the arbitrator, Martin Scheinman, and then the noise coming out of the Eric Adams administration were playing a game of chicken and putting everything on a path towards, the city council was going to have to make a choice. They were either going to support Mayor Adams and the path that the MLC leadership, wanted to pursue, or figure out another way and say no. And they decided after a very moving, my experience of it, and I think a lot of you were there or were tuned in online, a very moving City Council Civil Service and Labor Committee hearing on January 9th. Dozens of PSC retirees came out to testify. I would say even hundreds beyond, overall beyond PSC testified. New York City Office of Labor Relations testified, MLC leadership testified, some other labor union leaders testified, but really, the turnout from retirees and allies was just tremendous. And I think, in addition to all the phone calls, the emails, the visits, that so many of you were involved in, I think that hearing, if there were people who were still on the fence on the city council about that, I think that pushed them off the fence. And so they were on a nominal deadline to hold a vote on the administrative code change by January 19th. That was what Martin Scheinman, the arbitrator, had told them they needed to do. They just didn't call the vote. They didn't vote no, but they didn't call the vote at all. And I think they didn't call the vote because they knew they didn't have the votes. And so I think this was very important politically, because if you can think of what Eric Adams has been trying to do as a kind of a tug of war, trying to pull across the line, try to pull across that tug of war line, the opportunity to move everyone into Medicare Advantage who they could, and to be able to charge people, right, who they couldn't pull into Medicare Advantage, who to opt out, but they couldn't prevent people from opting out, but they wanted to be able to charge everyone, $200 a month to remain in senior care. And in that tug of war, he really wanted to enlist the council. He didn't want to, be pulling and kind of, have MLC leaders around the edge cheering them on. He wanted council to take ownership over it. And so far, anyway, that effort failed. And council said, we're not going to be on your team in this tug of war. And I think the exciting next step, and Bettina may want to talk more about this, or Dean or Debbie, I think the exciting next step is not just that they declined to really take part in that, because I think failing to take part in that is actually not enough. I think they need to take a constructive role and take on the mayor around this. But there has been now some interest, and even in just the time since that hearing, in using the PSC's proposal as the basis for a sign-on letter to push the Eric Adams administration, not speaking about Adrian Adams, the speaker, but the Eric Adams administration, to try to put some political pressure on the Eric Adams administration now by circulating a sign-on letter among the council. And we met with the Progressive Caucus of Council a week and a half ago. And it looks like there's some appetite to do this sign-on letter and to use the PSC's proposal as the basis for that letter to push the Eric Adams administration. I think it's anyone's guess about where this lands or where it goes. But I think, like everything else in this struggle, the important thing is to kind of never to say die, because when you push and you move the needle, I'm mixing my metaphors, but when you push, you don't know what the terrain is going to be really around the next corner. I mean, that's one lesson that I think we've seen really clearly throughout this fight, is you don't know whether, if you fight this battle, if you're going to win the whole war. And there's absolutely risks, and there still are. We should talk about them. But I think what we're seeing now is that the terrain changes. The terrain of struggle has changed a bit, because now things are squarely on Mayor Adams. It's not, well, Adrian Adams is supporting, the city council is supporting. We have the arbitrator to deal with, we have the mayor to deal with, we have unions too. Not every union, I should say, agrees with our analysis and position, but we're working on that too. So I think I'll wrap up there. There's a lot more concrete next things that we could talk about, but I wanted to try to lay out a little bit of the recent developments and give, from my point of view, some of the political overview of the ground that we've covered since certainly I was here at this meeting last, and maybe even since this chapter had a chance to meet last on this issue. So I don't know, Dean, Debbie, Bettina, if any of you want to come in before we turn things back over to our chair.
Yeah, thanks so much, James. Oh, go ahead, Ann. Thank you very much, James, for that excellent kind of overview of where we are in this, as James says, really overwhelmingly is a political struggle. I just wanted to be, just give you a little bit more specificity about the alternative that we are proposing and that members of the council are now taking up. And then also just talk a little bit about sort of where we as the PSC are situated institutionally in this fight, because I think that is just something that's important information to make people aware of. So specifically, what we've proposed and what we are hoping will appear in this letter that council members will be signing on to the mayor is first, and this part of it is thanks very much to the expertise of Barbara Caress and Debbie Bell. First, to buy enough time to do an intelligent restructuring of the way the city delivers healthcare to both in-service and retired members and their families. And that is by redirecting money that would otherwise go into something called the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which currently has a large surplus for the next 3 years in order to provide short-term relief to this. It's basically a collectively bargained stabilization fund that the city and the Municipal Labor Committee use to provide many different things, but among other things, it funds the welfare funds that we and other unions rely on. And there is a serious fiscal issue with respect to the health of the stabilization fund. It's quite complex, but basically our proposal finds a way to stabilize the stabilization fund for 2 to 3 fiscal years while we figure out the kinds of structural changes that we need to make in order to deliver healthcare in a way that members continue to receive excellent benefits and do not pay premiums. The second element of this, which is important, is that the council members who sign this letter will be asking the mayor to leave the current senior care plan in place premium free. And that's a critical element of our political strategy and objectives that we're gaining support in the council for right now. The third piece of it is that we're asking the mayor and the council to convene a stakeholders group to address the root problems in terms of healthcare financing and spending. And we are convinced that a big part of that, although not the whole ball of wax by any means, is the out of control cost of hospitalization. And so we think that a group like was used in 1976 when there was a fiscal crisis, to have a stakeholders group that has the relevant elected officials, the healthcare unions, public employee unions, representatives of hospitals and doctors, and a small number of experts to look at models from other states and cities to come up with effective changes that would really help us be able to get a lid on out of control healthcare costs as we protect worker and retiree benefits. And of course, in the PSC, we know and have long said that ultimately the solution is single payer, some form of single payer healthcare, preferably nationwide. And we will continue fighting for that. We will continue working for that. And this proposal is kind of how do we, in the meantime, protect the benefits of our members and our retirees while we're fighting for that goal. The other thing I just wanted to sort of put out there, and again, I know I'm saying stuff that a lot of people know, but I think it's just important to keep in mind. So the way that we bargain our healthcare is as a member of the Municipal Labor Committee, which is basically, I think it's like 135 unions that have members that either work directly for the city or receive, like we do, a substantial part of our funding from the city. The advantage to being part of the MLC is that there's leverage from 1,250,000 covered lives. The problem from our perspective is the city has not been effectively using that leverage. And that's one of the things that we would like to see as part of our proposal, to really more effectively use that leverage to keep costs under control and to hold the health insurance companies accountable. But we function within that context. And on the MLC, we are far from the biggest union. Although we have 30,000 members, that we're just dwarfed by the size of, for example, the UFT and DC 37. And in a situation like this, where we have a different point of view than they do, right? We've had to kind of walk the tightrope of pursuing what we see to be the interests of our members, both in service and retired, and other folks around the city, at the same time as that we are able to continue to have an effective working relationship with the other unions on the MLC, so that we can continue to effectively provide healthcare and welfare fund benefits to our members. So that just puts us in a different place institutionally than, for example, retiree groups that aren't part of the MLC, don't have to maintain positive, effective communications and working relationships with other unions. And so there's nothing wrong at all with sitting in a different place. we really respect the work of all of the retiree organizations. And I will just say, you know, we would not be in the position we are in today with not having Medicare Advantage implemented were it not for the litigation that was brought by the retiree organization. And we are in a different position, and we are able to be effective in a different way that some of the retiree organizations are not able to. We, for example, have been able to develop the expertise to develop a very serious alternative proposal that council members are taking seriously. We have open lines of communication to other unions. So we're in a position to be able to at least talk to them, and if not bring all of them on board, again, at least have an open channel of communication so that when it's time to cut a deal, that relationship is there. So I think I just want to put out there that in a struggle of this size and magnitude and importance, with a lot of players and a lot of constituencies, like, it's okay to have different groups pursuing the same goals, but occupying different places institutionally. And for that reason, having slightly different strategies and slightly different sets of relationships. And I think it's worked really well to this point, the kind of synergy between the work of the retiree organizations and the work that's really been led by the PSC in the labor movement. So that, I think, is it in terms of my contribution. And I don't know, Bettina, if you're on or if you have anything you might want to add right now.
No, I just want to say thank you to all of you. We have conversations with elected officials, and to truly be able to say, if you don't pay attention to the phone calls you're getting, they're gonna turn out, and you all turned out. So thank you. The fight, as we all know, is far from over, but this battle feels good. Thanks.
Thanks, Bettina. And then Debbie, I don't know, Debbie, if there's anything that you would like to add to the conversation.
No, I think you both, James and Dean, both summarized the context very well. And I think, you know, I'm happy to answer technical questions going forward.
Okay, well, thank you so much, all of you. And we have close to 300 people on this Zoom. And just a reminder, this is a meeting for members of the retiree chapter. It is not an open meeting. It is for members of the retiree chapter. I want to suggest that if you have a question or comment, you try to talk about something that not only applies to you personally as one individual, but something that we can hear answers to that would have a broader influence, interest of our members. So we're going to try to keep your questions and comments and also the responses, to about no more than 2 minutes. So if you have a question or a concern, raise your Zoom hand. I noticed there were some people writing questions in the chat. If you want to get responses to those today, I ask you please to raise your Zoom hand and ask those to the whole body. So first up, we're gonna call on people one at a time, but the first person up is Bob Cowan, followed by Marvin Saporin and Lynn Beakey. So let's hear Robert Cowan.
Hi. A few days ago, I got a newsletter from my city councilman, James Nero. This interesting newsletter, and what it omitted. There was no mention of the retirees' health care issue or the meeting on January 9th. So what does that tell you? It tells you that James Gennaro does not want to commit himself. He wants to stay on the fence, wants to be friends with everybody. Well, that's not good enough for us, right? We need commitments from city councilmen to have our backs. Otherwise, we won't have their backs. Well, I would like to organize a meeting of 25 to 30 of his constituents who are retirees. I think this is possible. His district is in, Queens College is located in his district, so there are probably plenty of people from the PSC who live in his district. Now, I would hope that the legislative committee would help organize this. It's not enough just to talk to him one-on-one, is to show him that we're a group with power and interest and express our concerns directly to him. I did go to a meeting with Mary Ann and some other people, and we talked to his legislative assistant. I hope that we could talk to him in person to impress upon him our need and the seriousness of our purpose. So I'm asking that the Legislative Council arrange such a big meeting or try to arrange with James Gennaro. Otherwise, I will try and arrange it myself with other people that I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
If
Thank you.
if anybody here is in his district, please let me know. robert.cowan@gmail.com. Thank you.
Okay, well, Bettina is here and I'm sure she heard that idea, which is a good idea. Well, next is Marvin Saporin, who I've been dialoguing with over and over and over via email, but have never met. So at least I'm meeting you on Zoom now, Marvin.
Wow.
So you're next.
One day we might actually be able to meet in person.
Yeah, I hope so.
I remember that as an historian. So I think two things that might be important to remember in our advocacy is one, which you got a strong feeling at the council meeting, the administration was really dissing the council, and council members took umbrage at the fact that they didn't get any information about the draft agreement with Aetna that was supposed to be so wonderful. And yet the next week, Cranes came out with information from emails that Aetna at most was going to possibly change their policy about pre-authorizations for up to 2 years. Unlike the administration claiming, oh, well, we've gotten rid of that, except for 1% that'll cover hundreds of thousands of visits. So I think both of those are important things to stress. And I think we probably also shouldn't neglect an important political thing with some of the council members that Council Member Barron mentioned, and that's the history of Aetna's relationship to underwriting slavery. So I think the multiple ways of criticizing this approach might be most effective. And lastly, I just want to thank the staff and everybody else who's been so involved in this effort, which has really been a model. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin, and thank you for your continued advocacy and work on this.
By the way, in terms of what Bob said, we had a meeting with Shahana Hanif, who's not on the committee, but is co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, like the one that he talked about. And that probably helped contribute to her strong stand against it, plus her own health issues.
I'm sure. Okay, I'm going to call on Lenore, but up next will be Elise Newman, Erwin Yellowitz. So Lenore, hi Lenore, how you doing?
Hi, Anne, how are you? Been a long
Okay.
time. Thank you. And my question is about the threat by the arbitrator to eliminate senior care altogether. Now, my understanding, and that of course is a threat, and we will fight it, and hopefully it won't happen. And I'm sorry to even bring it up at this point, but it is a threat. And if it happened, I have an understanding that we would then be able to take Medicare and be out on our own to get a supplement, like the way that people do with the AARP plans, for example. But if that happens, if that threat is acceded to eliminate senior care, does it threaten the reimbursements, and does it also threaten the welfare fund benefits themselves? I've heard contradictory statements about those.
Okay, that's a really good question. So I don't know, Debbie, who wants to take that question to start?
I'll start.
Okay, Debbie Bell.
We are taking the position at this point that we don't have clear answers. On the Medicare reimbursement, the administrative code language is, in our reading, not crystal clear. You have to be covered by Medicare to get the reimbursement for the Medicare Part B. The city's practice historically has been that you have to be in a city-sponsored Medicare supplemental plan to get Medicare Part B reimbursed. Therefore, if they start to say to retirees who go out and buy a Medigap plan, as Lenore described, I have no doubt that there will be lawsuits concerning eligibility for Medicare reimbursement. And quite frankly, once again, the underlying language is not crystal clear. I will say that the other issue is the welfare fund coverage. That eligibility for those retirees in TIA-CREF is covered in the contract, because TIA-CREF is a type of retirement plan that is unlike the defined benefit plans that most city employees are part of. Therefore, when the ORP was established, PSC negotiated with CUNY about language regarding welfare fund benefits in retirement for those 65 and older. That language is clearer and more explicit that you have to be part of a city health plan as a Medicare eligible retiree to receive retiree benefits. It is, however, part of the contract and therefore a bargainable issue. So it's not hard and fast how we deal with it. I realize these are not the answers people want to hear, but we've known for a year and a half of talking about this at these meetings, that these benefits are at issue going forward. So we are continuing to stay on top of it and to consult with attorneys about how to proceed.
Does any of our other speakers want to comment? Okay, thanks, Debbie. It's really hard with these uncertainties, but we're doing the best we can. So Elise Newman next. Hi, Elise.
Hi, thank you so much. I also just want to thank everybody who's been taking on a leadership role in this fight. I'm a recent retiree, but I've been involved in this Medicare issue since I retired last year. I was at City Hall, in the beginning of the month, and was very, very inspired by what I saw there. But I was sitting with some people who were, one was in DC 37, one was in UFT. And I was very proud to be a PSC member because of the leadership and because there were ideas about, as James Davis said, just not saying no. But I was also curious about whether there's any precedent from any other unions about who might have been faced with this kind of struggle. And also, is it possible for us to expand beyond just the city unions to try to see if there might be some solidarity there or a way to organize? As James Davis said, this is a much larger issue than just facing New York City employees. And just wondering if there's any effort in organizing on a higher level. So two parts, any organizing on a higher level and any precedent for any other union that's been faced with, or any other retirees who've been faced with these kinds of choices or lack of choices.
Okay, well, I think James or Dean, would one of you want to respond?
I'll start. Let me start. Thanks, Elise. And let me just start with the second part of what, and maybe some others can come in on, other unions or cities that have dealt with comparable issues. At the moment, I think and your comment makes me think like we should think hard about this. But at the moment, our focus has really been on trying to expand the dialogue and the base of unions that are willing to try to strategize locally, city unions, to try to strategize with us around moving an alternative agenda, if not exactly our agenda, then something like it. So we've had some meetings with, I guess, what I would call dissenting unions within the MLC, and we're planning to have another one because that was prior to the January 9th City Council meeting. And I think, as I said before, I think the terrain has shifted a little bit as a result of, and since that meeting, we're going to come back to that. The tricky thing right now, and it relates to Debbie's point before, right, is that there's some force to the argument that, well, if the administrative code doesn't get changed, then there's just not going to be a senior care option. There won't be a pay up option for senior care, right? That's kind of the game of chicken. And I think that there may be a number of unions out there that may not love the idea of Medicare Advantage. It's not that they think it's innocuous or amazing, but that they are really concerned about, as people have said, that Eric Adams might use the nuclear option, or that they don't want to potentially place their retirees at risk. And certainly we are sympathetic to that and share that concern. But right now, in the moment, at least what we're trying to do is to broaden that network of dissenting unions, or potentially dissenting unions, that want to shift the terms of the discussion outside of just, okay, either go along, figure out how to make this happen, contain the damage, get that $600 million that the MLC, is on the hook for, or not, or just say no. And I would have to think, and I'm, interested to hear more others on this call about your proposal to look outside the city. Our statewide union, NYSET, is in a difficult position because UFT is a major player in NYSET. And so it's tricky when it comes to our statewide, but that's a conversation that I've also been trying to maintain with NYSET as well. So I don't know if others want to pick up on that. I know I've only barely scratched the surface, Elise, of your comments and suggestions.
I would just add two things. One is, obviously, this whole, there's a federal incentive to shift people from traditional Medicare into Medicare Advantage. And so we are far from the only place where this is happening. So yeah, to that extent, that's a really great point, Elise. On the other hand, like right now, we are dealing with it's an existential kind of issue directly with the city of New York, and we need to win. We need to win in the city of New York right now, at least, buy some time and get the threat of taking away people's Medicare and senior care lifted. And I think right now, to win this fight that's right in front of us, it's really city unions that have to be our primary focus. But I agree, like, once we can get this immediate threat lifted, in order to address both the problem of Medicare Advantage and the problem of, the crisis in, healthcare costs and coverage, that's a national fight that, we need to be part of.
Okay, thank you. Erwin Yellowitz, and somebody's asking about how to raise a hand. You go to the bottom of the Zoom screen, over to the right, that little smiley face reactions. If you click on that, you'll see an option to raise hand. Okay, Erwin, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And first, I want to say that the PSC proposal is a brilliant idea. I think it's a way for some of these unions to get out of the box that they're in. The box, as I see it, is that the city has made clear since Bloomberg's time that it will not negotiate contracts without healthcare savings. And so the healthcare savings are being done on the backs of retirees at the moment. They may in the future be done for in-service people. So my question is, the UFT is a very important player in this. And I had brought this up at the executive committee, and I want to get your reaction to it. 65,000 people opted out of the original proposal. Many of those, I don't know how many, but a good number were UFT people, because it's the upper income city employees who can afford to even consider $200 a month. It's not the DC 37 people who are paid at much lower levels. If we were to go to the nuclear option that Adams is threatening, and I think he has publicly threatened it, wouldn't this affect UFT in a very, very strong way? Michael Mulgrew would suddenly face not only the prospect of opposition from some of his opposing caucuses, which he's dealt with over the years, but he would have a huge number of retirees who would be incensed at the fact that they now have to go into Medicare Advantage and have no option after they had chosen an option earlier. Is this something that might lead UFT to reconsider its opinion? And if they did, that might change the political landscape, because I don't think the mayor would go ahead with anything like a nuclear option if UFT were not to support it.
I don't know, Dean or James, it's a hypothetical, but it's
No, Erwin raises a really good point. Erwin, by the way, it's great to see you as always. I can almost see you all the way there, sequestered in your beautiful office. That political calculation, I'm not prepared to speculate on, the UFT leadership's position on that, except to say I think you raise a really important point. And I think unlike DC 37, am I right about this, Debbie, that UFT retirees are in their union, and whereas DC 37 are not? Is that accurate, or do I have it reversed?
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
He's correct, yeah.
UFT have half votes.
UFT retirees have half votes. Okay, got it. So yeah, I mean, Erwin, you're asking a political question I don't know the answer to, but I think you're right to ask it, and there may be something to it. And I don't know. I also don't know how many of those 65,000 original opt-outs are UFT. And I think I don't know how many will, if there's an opt-out, if Medicare Advantage is, if this Aetna contract comes through, I don't know how many, and there is an opt-out option. I don't know whether we'll see comparable numbers. One would expect that there would be, but I would also expect the contract to look a bit different and the rollout of the contract to look different too. But I mean, I hear your point completely.
Thanks. Mike Frank?
Yes, Dean mentioned that the stabilization fund has financial difficulties. It's been claimed by some that the MLC dipped into the stabilization fund to help pay for salary increases, and that contributed to the financial difficulties. And apparently that got enough resonance that the UFT newspaper responded to the question in the following way. And they posed the question: did unions borrowing from the stabilization fund cause our current healthcare crisis? That was, and they give an answer, and their answer was no. When the city and the MLC agreed in 2014 to use funds from the stabilization funds to help pay for salary increases for all city workers, the funds that were drawn down were completely offset by $1 billion in cost-saving measures in healthcare. So would that, if that's true, would that help to explain the fixation of DC 37 and the UFT on going for Medicare Advantage and not considering other options?
I'll take a first stab at that. And Debbie is the real expert on the workings of the stabilization fund, which is incredibly complex. So two things I would say. One is that there has been this pattern that has developed that the leaders of the large unions have not, at least publicly, challenged as was said earlier, of the city tying its willingness to bargain over wages to savings in healthcare. And the stabilization fund and the tripartite committee sort of becomes the fulcrum for that negotiation. And yes, they chose this Medicare Advantage, solution, I put in quotes, out of a list of possible, ways of saving money from the 2018 health savings agreement. And obviously we, PSC strongly disagree with that decision. But as I understand it from Debbie, who again knows a lot more about these things, the major fiscal challenge faced by the stabilization fund, among many, is this caused by this concept called equalization, in which the idea is that to the extent the HIP HMO costs more than what used to be GHI, the city would put money into the stabilization fund. To the extent GHI costs more than HIP HMO, the money would come out of the stabilization fund. For several years now, GHI has cost more than HIP HMO. That doesn't show any signs of changing. If anything, the difference is going to get greater. And so the stabilization fund just keeps going into a deeper and deeper hole. There's all kinds of structural issues with the stabilization fund. That's just like the most obvious and easiest to explain. And Debbie may wish to elaborate.
I'm just going to make a couple of points about history. This fund has existed for 40 years and basically was to balance. For those of us who were working for the city in the 80s, you remember GHI got so expensive for a while that benefits were going to get cut. This was an effort to find balance. In 2014, the city unions were faced with the fact that they had no contracts. A new mayor had been elected. So the UFT and the new mayor and the new labor commissioner, Bob Lynn, came up with a concept of health savings in order to save money for the city so that there would be money for wage increases. And I'm being simplistic here. It's actually much more complicated than all this. But my point being that on some level, the UFT response is correct, that money did not literally go from the stabilization fund into wage increases. However, there was a lot of money in the stabilization fund in 2014 because of this equalization formula having where the HIP was costing more than GHI. Therefore, part of the agreement was that the stabilization fund would shift $1 million from the fund to the city. So there were maneuvers of money going back and forth. The important precedent that it set, Mike, and this is still true, is that the unions would agree to health savings so that the city could agree for wage increases. That happened in 2014. It happened again, with the 2018 health agreement. And now it's happening again in a somewhat less formal way. There's not a health savings agreement, but there's, let's save some money this way and that way, but let's still not deal with the structural problems of providing good health care. That's what the PSC is fighting for, that you really have to, we're at a point, as Dean said, inevitably the stabilization fund is going to need more money. You got to scrap the existing structures and restructure healthcare benefits and financing for municipal employees and retirees in order to ensure that they have good coverage and that the city can afford it. Not just tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. It's not going to work anymore.
Okay. Len Rodberg, sorry. Hi, Len.
Yes, hi there. We're in this pickle with what we've been calling the nuclear option, because the administrative code and the law that set it up doesn't describe what the benefits are that the city should provide, only that whatever it provides, we don't have to pay for them. That is, we don't have to pay a premium. Of course, there are co-pays that we may end up paying, and that you do if you're on Medicare Advantage. Anyway, my question is, how does the leadership here feel about the idea of the city council explicitly passing legislation that says that the city will pay for supplemental coverage for those who are on Medicare, as long as Medicare doesn't pay the full cost? I mean, some of us, of course, many of us, maybe most of us, are supporting Medicare for All, which would eliminate the need for co-pays and deductibles. But as long as they're there, it seems to me the city council should put into law that the city will cover the supplement. It's cheap compared to what it's spending for full coverage for actives. It's, it's 20% of what it costs for actives, although we're seniors and we're sick. So there is a greater expense. Anyway, that's an idea I've been suggesting to people, that the city council act proactively here and say, we oppose the nuclear option and want the city to cover senior care.
Okay. Who wants to take that? James, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to that, Len, and we have talked to some city council members about a legislative solution. I mean, Debbie, you may want to comment on the particular language here that that Len is proposing. But as you said, it's definitely not enough at this point to just say no, because then you're still leaving on the table the possibility that people could get cut out. And I'll just add one thing into this, which is, is it better for people to have the option to pay up and retain senior care than to just all be pushed into Medicare Advantage? We think so. But we also believe that there's a problem with tiering out, right, the system in such a way that only people who can afford it will be able to pay up and to be able to stay in senior care, right? That's not a choice. That's actually a coerced, that's a coerced push into Medicare Advantage. So anyway, that's my thought. And Debbie, what's your thought on Len's proposal about the legislative solution?
It's a concept that I think is mixing around in the stew. Part of what the PSC proposal is a stakeholders commission. And I think the idea there is that there isn't one solution. We've got to pull together all the best ideas that are out there and figure out what works together. So, there's no we have to get to the point of having the discussion where the ideas are put forward. That's all. I don't think anybody disagrees with it.
Thank you. John Highland? Are you
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yep. I'll try to get this out. I hope that it's behaving. Otherwise, we'll see. First of all, do we have access to how the 600 million that it's supposed to be saved has been spent? Can we get an independent stabilization fund has been managed by OLR and the MLC? Underlying that is, I think there's a financial dimension to this problem. It's political, but usually politics has something to do with money. Secondly, do the OLR and the MLC staff, especially the big four of Garrido and Mulgrew and Spoli and Floyd, do they know about all the critical reports on Medicare Advantage? I think we do. I mean, stuff flying around all the time. Report from the various groups studying this. So that question then is, if they don't know, why not? How can they be managing this thing and not and proposing this and not understand the field in which this is being played out? Secondly, if they do know, why are they locked into this one particular way of going about it, the Medicare Advantage Fund? And then the third thing is, what's the difference between the stabilization fund and the stabilization trust that I think has just sort of appeared on the scene in the form of trying to figure out a third way? What's the difference between the two of them, and why is one going bankrupt and the other has a surplus?
Okay.
There's one last quick one that I didn't get onto the screen. In all of this, it seems to me we're talking about cuts and maneuvers and shiftings, and the one thing that I see absent, critical thing absent from this discussion, is revenue, which means some changes obviously in the tax structure and to whom it comes from and to whom it goes. Okay, that's it.
Okay, that's it? That's
That's all.
Okay. But that's great, John. Okay, so James, you want to start on that?
Yeah, I mean, John, thank you. The connection, at least coming through for me, was a little bit spotty, but I saw what you had written in the chat earlier, and they're really good questions. I'm going to go through them backwards really briefly. And I also want to say, if I have to leave this meeting before it's over, I'll leave my email in the chat. So anyone should feel free to email me. And John, some of these questions I don't pretend to have the definitive answer to, but hopefully some of what I'll say can begin to clarify. You mentioned revenue. I don't think you're going to get any disagreement here. I do think that, the savings, Julie Menon has a bill in the city council, and it's supported by DC 37 and NISNA and other unions. Lynn Schulman is on the bill, and many other progressive council members, about hospital pricing transparency. And their estimate is that the city is foregoing right now about $2 billion annually in potential savings from hospital overcharges. So we can talk about, revenue side, and I think you're right to raise that, but I think, part of the PSC's push to try to center hospital charges and leveraging the city's leverage over, so many lives that we represent, is to try to pursue those hospitals in ways that maybe haven't been done before. So there's revenue, and then there's savings. The issue about the stabilization fund and the other fund, it is so confusing. These are some of the things nobody told me I would have to learn about when they were saying, you should really run to be PSC president. Good Lord. But okay, but here we are. Okay, but they're fundamentally different formations, John. And I think it's really, it's important that we're clear in broad strokes about them, right? The stabilization fund is an artifact, right, of MLC negotiations with the city, and it's sort of jointly administered, right, between OLR and the Municipal Labor Committee unions. And, you know, as was mentioned before, it's a way to equalize the spending between the comprehensive benefits plan, emblem GHI, and the HIP rate. And at this point, the HIP rate has been suppressed for so long, and apparently will continue to be suppressed for so long, that there is really no equalization possible. You know, it's either on an annual basis, either the city would pay in or the MLC would pay in, and it would equalize the rate. But the HIP rate is, at least from our understanding, foreseeable future, not going to keep up with the CBP emblem rate. And so it's structurally now going to continue to run a deficit. That's the $600 million immediate problem, which is now increasing over time. It's no longer just 600 million, but when they were looking to Medicare Advantage to solve a problem, that was the problem. The Retiree Health Benefits Trust is a citywide fund that was created essentially to have a place to hold accruals. When the city was flush, they could put money into Retiree Health Benefits Trust, and it could accrue. Otherwise, they would have to lose that funding. So that Retiree Health Benefits Trust currently has about $4.5 billion in it. Sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but more than $3 billion every fiscal year is used to pay out covering retiree health benefits. So that is a city fund. That is just that's a city reserves. And what our proposal does is to say, normally the city would reimburse that Retiree Health Benefits Trust annually for its costs. And we're saying hold back about $500 million a year in city reimbursements to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust and redirect it to the stabilization fund, because the stabilization fund genuinely is insolvent at this point. I took too long in answering your third question, so I'm going to be really brief in trying on the first two. Do the leaders of OLR and MLC know about the criticisms of Medicare Advantage? And if so, why are they locked into this path? I can't speak about what the OLR, the Office of Labor Relations, knows. I suspect they know very well what criticism of Medicare Advantage are like. In terms of MLC leadership, I mean, this is an ongoing and vigorous debate and discussion within the MLC. And so I want to say, yes, that they are aware. The issue is that, you know, at none other potential contractors for the city Medicare Advantage plan have said that this is not a generic off-the-shelf, you know, Joe Namath nighttime TV promoted plan. This is a plan that's tailored specifically to the needs of New York City retirees and can also be negotiated. The terms can be negotiated specifically to meet those needs. And I think that they believe that. Whether you or I believe it may be a different thing, but I think the leadership of the MLC believes genuinely that this is not a cookie cutter, you know, Medicare Advantage plan that you might have gotten sold to you, you know, 5 years ago off TV. And it's not necessarily the one that a retiree in Omaha, Nebraska or Sarasota, Florida may get. This is specific to the needs of our members. And if you tell us that you want a hospital for special surgery to be in there, if you tell us that you want MSKCC to be in it, we are going to negotiate with you to make sure that that's the case. And so, you know, to the extent that that's been persuasive, that I think that is why. Why are they locked into this path? I don't think that any, you know, I don't know. I know that there's some conspiratorial thinking they're going to benefit directly from the contract. Whatever you think about that, I don't think it's about that. I think that they believe that they're going to do right by their members by getting them raises, and they're going to do right by their retirees by making sure that the Medicare Advantage is as absolutely good as it can be before they sign on to it, and that they're on the hook because they signed on the dotted line for an agreement with the city that said they could deliver $600 million in healthcare savings. And this is the best way to do it, or the least bad way to do it, okay? How has the $600 million been spent? And I don't know, John, I don't know I don't know if you're conspiratorial minded about this, but the thing about the $600 million savings is that it's not going to go back to the city. It's earmarked to go back into the stabilization fund. So I would say the answer to that is the same as the answer to how has any of the money in the stabilization fund been spent, right? There's, for example, $165 per capita reimbursement to all the union welfare funds, which we're having to forego now because the stabilization fund is currently insolvent. There's coverage of certain drug plans, right? Certain welfare funds don't have that ours do, but it pays for chemotherapy, for example, and injectables for certain retirees. So there's a lot of ways that the stabilization fund supports, retirees and others in and outside of welfare fund arrangements. So I would construct the question a little bit differently, because I don't think that there's a narrow way in which the $600 million proposed savings on Medicare Advantage is going to be spent, other than the way that the stabilization funds are generally spent. And, Debbie may disagree or have a more detailed answer, but that would be my sense of it.
I just want to acknowledge how much James has learned. He said earlier it had to be a quick study, and he has done a terrific job, because I don't have much more to add except to say, John, that because the stabilization fund is a joint fund, there are representatives on a joint labor management committee who see monthly reports about spending and revenues. It's not terribly complicated how things are spent. We see it. And auditing it isn't what's critical here. It's agreeing that it just doesn't work anymore. The structure of it is just, a few years out of date, and we've got to change it.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Samuel Farber.
Yes, thank you. I only want to raise two factual issues to clarify them. One is, until last week, the focal point was what City Hall would do. What would be the focal point for, say, the next 6 months, maybe even the rest of the year? That's question number one. Question number two, reference was made here to the nuclear option by the mayor. I imagine that means to do away with the health plan altogether. Or if that is so, can he do it without again going to the city council and getting it approved? The city council maintain, at least with its silence, certain rights that the administrative code gives us. Can he do that nuclear option without having to return to the city council? Thank you.
I don't know, maybe Dean, do you want to take that to give?
Sure, I can definitely do part two, and then James and our others can chime in on part one. In terms of the nuclear option, I think what folks are referring to right now in this meeting is the mayor carrying out the threat that was made by the arbitrator and by the OLR to essentially not offer senior care as an option anymore, so that effectively everybody would be forced into Medicare Advantage. It's not clear at all that the mayor or anybody working for the city can do that without changing the administrative code. And so I think there would be litigation if that happens. And I won't predict what the outcome of that litigation would be, but yeah, it's not clear at all if you look at the language of 12-126 that the mayor has the authority to do that unilaterally. In terms of the focal point in the next 6 months to 1 year, I think right now, our focus needs to be on once that sign-on letter is there, and Bettina can weigh in on this, encouraging members of the council to sign on to the letter. Then the focus will turn to pressuring the mayor to agree to the program that's laid out in the letter. Hopefully that would happen within the next, very short period of time. And then assuming we're victorious there, then our focus, I think, becomes on the composition of the stakeholder committee and on the substantive proposals that are made by the stakeholder committee.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just throw a couple other things into the mix, and I won't be
Sure,
long, 'cause I know
sure.
there's a lot of other
Yeah,
comments.
yeah, sure. No, we have time.
Okay, real quick.
Dean has to leave at 2:30. I know that.
Sam, it's good to see you, and I'm not surprised that such an incisive set of questions comes from a retired political science professor at Brooklyn College. Thank you for the questions. I would just throw two other things into the mix in terms of like the terrain of struggle over the next several weeks. I think Dean is right in, talking about the focus on the city council, pressure then on the mayor. I think there's two other areas where we could really use the support of all PSC retirees. One is I think that organized labor in the city is going to have to come to some kind of a reckoning around this, because whatever happens inside, the confines of MLC meetings is certainly one thing, and I don't minimize that, as they're important sessions, but this struggle, has unfortunately, I think, pitted different segments of organized labor against one another, and I think we have to take that in and figure out how to come through this more united, on the other side. And directly related to that, I would say specifically, if the mayor, first of all, we should know that this mayor isn't the one, right, this mayor inherited the kind of, well, you got to do Medicare Advantage to solve this problem. And some of you will recall that as a candidate, he thought it was a bad idea. I think he was on the cover of one of the dailies saying, it sounds to me like a bait and switch. I think those are his actual words as candidate Adams. Now he's singing a different tune as Mayor Adams, but so he inherited it, and I guess hope springs eternal. I want to believe that he can be moved off of the current position of absolute intransigence. But if he's not, the next option, I don't know if it's called nuclear or nuclear adjacent or whatever. If he doesn't move everyone onto Medicare Advantage for whatever reason, it could still come back to all the labor unions that have open contracts, by the way, including ours, and say, well, it didn't go down this way. We couldn't achieve healthcare savings over here, and so you're going to have to agree at the bargaining table for healthcare savings, or it's got to come out of wages. And I just want to say, if that's the shape that things take, right, where we manage to save retiree premium-free healthcare, I know that I can count on all of you, right, to come out and to support those of us, your active colleagues, when we say, hell no, we're not going to take cuts at the table in wages or in healthcare give back. So that could, in answer to Sam's question, that could become the shape of a different kind of struggle in the months ahead. DC 37 is already opening, their contract negotiations are ongoing. UFT's contract negotiations are ongoing. Hopefully, we'll be at the table pretty soon. Our contract expires February 28th. So I know we can count on you all and all of your retiree colleagues to fight for us if that's the shape that things take going forward.
Yes, you can count on us. We've always, we've always been there. We've been there ourselves. We don't accept pitting one group against another. We don't, well, I'm not going to give a whole spiel. Maybe Joan has some. Joan Greenman, you're next.
No spiel. I just want to say two parts briefly. One, after the city council hearings and after the non-vote last Thursday, I'm pumped when are we going to get this letter that we then get other people to sign on to, digitally, in print, whatever form, and where are we taking it to? I got the broad political struggle, not the specifics for the next couple of weeks. And the second part is, excuse me, when I heard that the third part of our plan, the PSC plan, is to have a stakeholder group look at this. I got really excited because I said, yeah, the stakeholders are the retirees. But I didn't hear anybody say how we would be on such a panel. And that's what seems to have been left off from the MLC and OLR discussions. Thank you. And thank you, James and Dean and Debbie. Wow.
Just to clarify, Joan, when you're asking about retirees as stakeholders,
yes,
you're talking about us or beyond us? What are there, 250,000 retirees? I'm not sure.
yes. No, I'm talking about beyond us, of course,
Beyond us.
but some kind of representation of real old people.
Because we have representation and we're very lucky to have it.
Yes, but not on a stakeholder panel. And
well, we will be on the stakeholder panel if we can have anything to say about it. But anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, Joan, are you volunteering?
Of course.
So, yeah, we don't know what shape it would take, right? It would require the council to embrace this, and I believe it will require the mayor to acquiesce and say, yes, this is the right thing to do. And we've made the case certainly that retirees are among the, if not the most important stakeholders. We would want health policy experts in there. We would want doctors and physicians in there, but we would want retiree representatives on that stakeholders commission. And we've been advocating for that, publicly and privately in our conversations with city council members. The sign-on letter is being worked on as we speak. Bettina is workshopping it with council staff. So I don't know the exact timeline, but we're trying to get it done as soon as possible. Council member De La Rosa, who's the chair of the Civil Service and Labor Committee, is very eager to have a final version of that sign-on letter. So I hope sooner than later, Joan.
Okay, Bonnie, was your hand up? Okay, I thought I saw it. So before I go back to the three folks who've spoken already, I just want to give a moment here to encourage or ask any of you who have questions, thoughts. I know some of you are putting stuff in the chat. I can't really keep track of that. Somebody will look at the chat later on, but some people have raised some good questions. And I'm going to wait a minute, as you're supposed to do in the classroom, don't just call on the first person who raises her hand. You give a little thinking time.
And can I barge in during? I'm going to barge in because I'm going to have to jump off the meeting.
Okay, James, sure, barge.
I just want to make sure one thing is very clear, and this is a very concrete thing. If there were to be a Medicare Advantage plan at all, it couldn't. I mean, logistically, it couldn't happen before this coming summer. It's not the case. Some of the scare tactics or whatever amplify the apprehensions around this. But even if there were to be a signed contract with Aetna, and Debbie has a clearer idea than I do about potential timelines, but I think the thinking was if something were approved even in January, the earliest that it could be implemented would be the summer. And I think at that point, even that timeline is probably no longer viable. So Debbie, I wanted to make sure we put that out, and correct me if I'm wrong about that, because among the many confusing elements of this saga is, you see this thing come out. We're all about to be thrown into a privatized Medicare Advantage plan. And even the timing of the worst case scenario is, I think, worth taking in.
Just quickly, the city's position has moved over the past 8 weeks from April 1st to July 1st to now it's August 1st. That's a very tight timeline. If for those of us who went through the implementation of the Alliance plan in 2021, it's a very tight timeline. So, you know, we'll stay on top of it. We'll let you know, but it could be, you know, in the middle of everybody's summer vacation. Really intelligent way to do it. But more to come.
Before I go to the other three hands, I did catch something in the chat, and it's something that I've been thinking about too. Joan raised the issue of the cost of senior care if there were an option ultimately to, you know, buy up. And it was $191 way back in history when many of us chose to opt out. But I'm under the impression that that is not a stable figure. I mean, that was a 2022 figure. What can you just say anything? I think, Debbie, you've talked about this. It can go up, right?
Yes, it is. Insurance rates go up every year. Senior care goes up very slowly over time, or has historically. So it may be slightly more than the $191 if in fact it is offered as a buy-up. But I don't think it's going to be more than 200 at this point. And it may be very close to, it may be less.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
but,
All right.
you know, there's still a long way until we get to the buy-up information.
Okay, I know James has to go. He spent an hour and a half with us. Thank you so much, James. And you're a terrific president, a great leader, brilliant. And we're really lucky to have you. And good luck at your next meeting.
Thanks for having me. My email is in the chat. And about this or anything else, feel free
Okay.
to email me at any time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
you can also email the retirees email. I read that every day, and you know, we can get to your questions. I don't know, Dean had to leave is also, I think. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we have a little more time. Debbie has agreed to stay. I see somebody with a physical hand half up. Alicia Villafani. I know your husband very well, or knew him when he was active. You have to be unmuted.
Okay. Yes, I got the answer. My husband and I are on two different plans. I'm on senior care, and I got an answer from Cecile saying that we have been paying, you know, receiving bills to senior care. We've been talking about senior care. And of course, she said that Emblem has been advised, do not pay anymore until we get further notice. But nothing's been said about those that might be in another plan called the HIP Senior VIP. That's with the VIP Senior. And that is my husband, when he went to see a physician, he paid a co-payment. I believe at that time was $30, and then got a bill again. And this might be happening to other HIP Senior VIPs. He got an additional bill of $30. And when the call was made, why an additional, he said, I paid that already. Oh, because you were not at a hospital site. Is that in order or not? He paid it second time. And that was even more than the senior care people who are only paying $15 per visit every time you see someone, or whatever is being done right now. So I would just wonder if that was in order or not. And And what is happening for them, the senior?
So
Okay.
I'll try to help you answer. I don't have a flat, complete answer. The lawsuit that put on hold the copays only affected senior care. It did not affect HIP VIP, which is, so to the extent that they had copays in place, they are still in place. It sounds a bit odd that he got double charged. I think my recommendation would be to first contact HIP VIP and ask why, with the bills in front of you. And second, if you don't get a satisfactory answer, contact Patrick Smith at the Welfare Fund and perhaps he can advocate. I understand that sometimes these insurance companies are not terribly responsive.
Mhm.
The hospitals have a miraculous way of figuring out how to double charge you, but they don't always do it correctly. So it's worth challenging, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and Pat is always available, and the welfare fund can hopefully help you some, if not completely. So I see 3 hands. I'll take those questions. We've heard from you before, and then if I don't see any other hands, we'll close out the meeting. It would be good if you could raise your Zoom hand, because I'm only seeing one screen here. So if people are raising their physical hands, I don't see them. So we're going back to Len Rodberg.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. I just want to add a point of information. I heard several times here, and I heard multiple times at the hearing how they're negotiating a better Medicare Advantage plan than the usual plan. And it's always infuriating to me because it means that whoever's saying that doesn't understand the economics of how Medicare Advantage works. This particular one, the city is not paying anything. All the money comes from the federal government. And we know from federal government reports how much the federal government pays to Medicare Advantage plans. And in our case, it's $840 million a year less than it is now costing a combination of Medicare plus the city. This is cut rate medicine we're going to be offered if it comes through, no matter what the negotiation is. I put in the chat a link to a short article I wrote on this that was published in Common Dreams. There's a link to it someplace earlier in the chat if you want to see how I got that number.
I'll just comment that to the extent that any of us talk about it being a special plan, we are quoting the city of New York. None of us has seen a plan. None of us has seen a contract. And as we know from the last time around, once we were actually able to read the contract, a lot of problems and contradictions emerged.
Yeah.
So thank you, Len, for pointing that out.
But the contract, seeing the contract won't help. You have to look at the economics.
I
and
understand.
The economics are very
Okay,
simple.
well, we have you to call on, and we know that. Okay.
Good. Good.
All right, Bob Cowan.
Thank you. My question in the beginning had an implicit question. My statement in the beginning had an implicit question, which never got answered. So I think I'll make it explicit. The question is, will the legislative committee organize visits to individual council members who don't support us, or provide lists to other PSC members by district to organize these visits? So what will the legislative committee do for us to facilitate visits to individual council members such as mine, Jim Gennaro, who has not expressed support for our concerns?
Let me just say one thing, and then I don't know if Debbie has anything to say or anybody on our ledge committee. So much is going on behind the scenes that, many of us just don't see or know about. And our ledge team has strategically been for months organizing visits. Many of them are Zoom visits. Some people have organized their own visits. And so visits and lobbying has been going on, organized through the PSC, and we're not the only group, of course, that's doing that. Some people on their own are doing things, but I don't know if Bettina is still on, but you're talking about strategy going forward. And if she's not here, we'll take that question back, because you identified a particular council person whom, I don't know if we've lobbied or if we haven't.
Yeah, let me just say that I visited by Zoom with this council person, and his representative, who didn't get to meet him, listened to us, seemed sympathetic, but he has not come out one way or the other. We've got to be very strong and visit them en masse with 25 or 30 people and say, this is what we want, and we'll support you or not.
Okay, well, we're going to be bringing a letter and asking council people to sign it. And we're going to need you and your crew to get to Gennaro. I forgot, his name, but absolutely, I mean, they don't come out, and it's not easy to get directly to the council people. I have been at numerous meetings with Eric Dinowitz, who is the chair of the Higher Ed Committee. And eventually I've had some very good conversations with his staff, but never directly. And that seems to be the way things go. It may not be the best, but you're not the only one who hasn't come face to face with the person you elected. Before I call on Mike Frank, seems I'm always doing this to you, Mike. There's another hand, somebody who hasn't asked a question. I'd love to see your face, Rose, because I remember you from so many good times way back then, but I think I know Rose Ortiz. Rose. Is Rose there? Okay. Well, then we'll come back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted some clarification about the payment of the $15 copay for, I've been getting continuous bills for the doctor's visits that we've just been to. And so I don't know whether I missed something, but am I to hold off in paying those?
That's a great question.
Good question. Two pieces of information. One is that the copays are not in effect as of January 12th at the moment. So from Emblem's point of view. So if any of your doctor visits are prior to that date, you may end up having to pay them. But Emblem has said they will not be collecting copays for provider visits from January 12th on. There is, Bonnie Nelson put in the chat earlier during the meeting, the Office of Labor Relations message from Emblem about what types of providers and their copays are no longer being charged. As to copays for visits before January 12th, Emblem has not, oh, there she did it again. Emblem has not taken a position on whether they will be collected or not. So I think, that is sort of your call as to whether to pay them or not. They have, part of this is because they have not, Emblem had not decided whether to appeal the judge's ruling. So we will keep you informed as to what they do going forward. I realize that's a sort of non-answer, but that's the best we can do at the moment, because we don't have, I don't want to give you wrong information.
Okay, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Debbie. Okay, Mike Frank.
Thank you. Two brief points, or I hope I can make them briefly. the privatization issue. The MLC denies that this is privatization, right? They deny it.
I know.
The,
The UFT denies it.
the UFT denies it. Okay. The NYSUT newspaper, the previous one, not the last one, had a statement on the whole question, and they deny that it's a privatization. The MLC, I'm sorry, the UFT newspaper answered it very clearly as to why they think it's not. And to the question, was the New York City Medicare Advantage plan an effort to privatize Medicare? The answer, of course, is yes. Their answer is no. Why? No, the proposed plan was in fact a Medicare program. The city and the unions were able to access federal funding because it was a public program, right? Well, that's what Medicare, I'm sorry, that's what privatization is. It manages federal funds, right, for profit, right, for the interest of profit. It would be nice if the if the PSC leadership wrote a letter to NYSUT, the newspaper, explaining what privatization actually is, and disabuse the tens of thousands of readers of that paper, I assume they read it, of that misinformation, to use their phrase. All right. The last point, second point, the MLC seems, when the city says we're not going to negotiate salary increases until you explain, talk about and explain reductions in Medicare, I'm sorry, in medical expenses, in medical insurance expenses. Okay, the MLC seems to accept that without question, without challenge. It does not challenge the budget of the city, or either revenue or expenses, and it simply accepts this. And it does not have a perspective of organizing and mobilizing its own membership, right, to challenge the city on this. And I think this is the big political backdrop to the entire conversation we're having here, right? That this is the biggest part of the reality here, the refusal to actually fight and mobilize the potential power of New York City labor to challenge the city. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very good way to wrap up, and I don't think any of us would disagree with that. Mike, I do know that our president, James, and Barbara Bowen, who I think still sits on, I can never follow what committee of the MLC does what, but in with the big guns in the room, the UFT, DC 37, Harry Nispoli from sanitation, Barbara, and now James have been advocating, explaining, asking, absolutely. In fact, it's been very courageous for James to do that. And he knows what is right and he will stand up for it. And he has conversations with other union leaders. There are smaller unions, who are with us, but it's a very big issue. James used the phrase, I think, walking a tightrope. And also, it's not a one union, one vote in the MLC. It is, what is it, Debbie? It's by, if you're a big union, you get more votes. So 2 unions actually control what's going on in the UFT. And you're absolutely right that, how do you change that? I mean, members of their own unions have to figure out, what they want to do. I mean, our members are very, very involved, and we are part of the bigger union. So I forgot this. Yes, and it's a tremendous political problem. And I don't know if anybody else, wants to say anything on that, but and Erwin's, going back to Erwin's question at the beginning, hypothetically, what might happen now with Michael Mulgrew and Garrido, but specifically with the UFT, might their postures change? I mean, anything is possible. And we will do whatever we can, to bring as many allies into this as possible. And we already have allies. I mean, I don't remember the names of all the unions, but Debbie probably does. Anyway, I want to thank Debbie Bell so much. Debbie was our executive director for how many years, Debbie? 20, 10, 15? She was our
19 and a half.
19 and a half. She couldn't quite make it the other half of the year to 20. Something happened, I don't know what, but she just couldn't wait to retire. She was our executive director, and she is retired. And Debbie has the suitcase in her brain, as I call it, with so much knowledge on healthcare issues. And we're really lucky that she's come out of retirement and started to work on this with Barbara Caress has been mentioned, brilliant people. I mean, we really have brilliant people working on this. You may not see it directly all the time, but when you see a plan, a forward-looking plan that doesn't just say no, but says, let's try this and let's try that. There is a lot of research, very careful thinking behind that. And we are very lucky to have the people who have the information and have the smarts and are ready to step up to do that. So I think that it's time to remind you that the next meeting is February 6th. Oh, I see a hand. James Pearlstein.
Yeah, I second everything that Ann said, but my takeaway from this meeting is that union leadership itself recognized that it was grassroots mobilization in the PSC and across the board in the city that was the spark that lit the fire under the experts like Debbie and Barbara Caress and Barbara Bowen and so on. And I think the message, or my takeaway anyway, from this meeting is that it's going to be grassroots mobilization that's going to drive this forward. And we have to keep that in mind, and we have to take that as a charge and a challenge to each and every one of us. That it was our work that got this going and got us this far, and it's our work that's going to take us forward.
Great. Said much better than I did. Also, Jim, by the way, is on our executive council, and he is kind of a go-between between us and what other groups. There are a whole bunch of other groups fighting for the same thing, as James said at the beginning. And he's, keeping up with that and keeping us informed, and has done great work, like many of us. So February 6th is the next meeting. The topic is, we're going to try, unless we're in, big crisis and we feel we need to devote 2 hours to a discussion like this. The planned program is on climate change. And one of the speakers is going to be Len Rodberg, who you heard before. And the second speaker, Ann Reynolds from, I can't remember the state organization, but we sent it to you in the last blast. We'll send you more information and hope that you will join us for that very important conversation. I hope you're getting our messages. Occasionally I get, you know, a post from somebody saying they're not getting our post. Usually you can expect 2, maybe 3, what we call blasts from us every month. And as long as we're on Zoom, you know, that's what we plan to continue to do. And if you have questions, if you have concerns, write to our address. I do read all that stuff. And if I can't answer, I pass it on to the people who can. I don't know if Diane or Bonnie have anything to say? No, before we close. Thank you so much. This was a very important meeting. Thank you for all of your work. Truly, being retired does not always mean being retired. There's plenty of work to do. And, you know, we really appreciate every one of you who steps up and does that work and supports us, because the leadership cannot lead without the members behind us. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day, and we'll be in touch. Thanks again, Debbie.